Well, thank you guys for joining me in today's podcast. Appreciate you being here. My hope is that you find encouragement from the unfolding chapters of my story of reconciliation. And again, I'm not an expert at this or coming from the point of I have it all together or I have all the answers. But I do know what it feels like to experience brokenness and betrayal. But I've also experienced just the miracle of reconciliation, and I've seen what God can do when we humble our hearts and we let Him lead the way in our lives. So, thank you for joining me in this journey as we share stories and discover the healing hope that's found in the power of Jesus Christ. So, today I'm going to kind of piggyback off of our last podcast where I talked about how started kind of this journey of self-evaluation and begin to realize that I had put up some toxic barriers in my life that I thought were healthy boundaries. And on the surface, they look alike. On the surface, they're very similar because they both keep things from entering into the circles of our lives. So on the surface, they look good. But when you dig deeper and you start to get to the root of each one, you realize they're totally different. And I think, it takes a person to have a humble heart and to let the Holy Spirit kind of direct you to discover which are healthy boundaries and which are toxic barriers. And in today's podcast, I kind of want to share some filters that I've used in my life to help me figure out, kind of how to identify a healthy boundary versus a toxic barrier. And this, by the way, this isn't foolproof. This isn't a cookie cutter approach or formula to every person's situation because your story is unique. And, I don't know your story. I can only speak from what I've gone through. So I encourage you, not only with this podcast, but with all the podcasts, take it with a grain of salt. Feel free to process it and feel free to disagree with it if you want to. And yeah, but so these are just a few filters that I've learned to kind of put in place. You can almost kind of call them lenses, but you know these are a list of things that I've been looking at to kind of help me differentiate between boundaries and barriers. So in this podcast, I want to focus on what's a healthy boundary, and in the next podcast, we'll talk about what's a toxic barrier. So let's get into it. So when it comes to a healthy boundary, these are the four filters that I've been using for me to kind of help me distinguish whether it's a healthy boundary or not. So the first thing is that a healthy boundary allows the right people to challenge you. Now I say the right people because, and you guys know this, there are some bad people out there who will try to speak into your life that really don't have any business doing that, right? So a healthy boundary allows the right people to challenge you in parts of your life. So for example, if I'm working on a project at work with a coworker or my boss, and we're working on a project together, I might have an idea of how things should go, right? I might say, okay, this is how we need to build this project, and this is the direction we need to go. And if they disagree with me or they say, I don't think that's right, I think we need to go this route or we need to make these changes, I need to be okay with that because they're the right people to challenge me, right? They've got skin in the game. They're a part of the process. They're a coworker. They're a teammate. They're trying to accomplish the same mission that I am. So in that context, those are the right people. If I'm connecting with a Christian marriage counselor who is a professional when it comes to marriage counseling and stuff, and they challenge me in areas as a husband and challenge me to do things differently, that's the right person to challenge me. If it's someone that I just met 5 minutes ago and they have no idea who I am or where my marriage is at, and they're trying to give me unsolicited advice, then that's probably the wrong person to challenge me, right? That's probably the wrong person to question my marriage. So healthy boundaries are all about allowing the right people to challenge you and to help you grow. So that's probably the first filter that I've been using, just asking, is this boundary allowing the right people the access to challenge me or ask me questions or help me grow as a person, or is this the wrong person? Um, if I'm cutting out the right people, then there's probably a little bit of a hint of ego happening. If my boss comes to me and says, Isaac, I think we need to approach this project this way, and I tell them no, and I get frustrated at them, that's probably a toxic barrier, because my boss probably knows uh, how to do this project and stuff. So there's just this kind of dancing that has to happen. This kind of, you have to really think through, okay, is this the right person? And that's something you have to come to terms with, is this the right person to give me this type of advice, or am I cutting off those people? Am I cutting off those people from giving me encouragement and helping me grow? And if that's the case, maybe it's a toxic barrier. So that's the first filter. The second filter is that a healthy boundary benefits everyone involved. So if if you're in an abusive relationship and you staying in that relationship is enabling that person to continue in their destructive behaviors, then by setting that boundary and keeping distance from them, not only are you benefiting yourself because you're distancing yourself from that person, but now you've stopped enabling that person. And it benefits both of you guys, because now you're not feeding in to their narcissism, right? You're cutting that enablement off, and there's a benefit for both of you guys, because you don't want to enable abusive people, right? So that's kind of an example of what a healthy boundary looks like. It's going to benefit everybody. Um, so so that's what I look at. I look at, okay, is this standard that I have in my life, is it benefiting everybody, or is it one-sided? And that can be kind of tricky sometimes to figure out. But even if you're uh, a manager or the boss at your workplace, like I remember running our own business and having employees under me and not always getting it right. I think that's probably a learning experience in itself. But in those situations where maybe I'm trying to help an employee do their job better or something, it might include difficult conversations that I have to have with that employee, right? It might include certain boundaries I've got to put in place to help that employee succeed. And even though they might not like it initially, or maybe it's a hard conversation to have, or maybe at the end of the day it's just not working out and I have to release them and let them kind of fly away and find a different, better job. A healthy boundary benefits everybody, because if that's the wrong job for that employee, they're going to find something better. And if that's the wrong job for that employee, you're going to find someone who's more passionate and equipped to do that job better, right? Um, so healthy boundaries benefit everybody involved. They don't destroy things unnecessarily, but they benefit everyone. At least in my personal story, that's what I've seen. They're not always easy, but they do benefit everyone. So that's the first filter. The third filter that I've been using is they create margin, not isolation. Now this is a big one for me. This is important for me. Um, when I get uncomfortable with someone challenging me, or when I disagree with somebody, my instinct is to distance myself from them. And again, that's different than distancing yourself from someone who's actually hurting you and you're trying not to enable them. But when someone disagrees with me or has a concern with me, or they're living a lifestyle that I don't agree with and I'm offended by them, I naturally will begin to distance myself from that person. Um, and we'll talk more about that, what that looks like in the next podcast when we talk about toxic barriers. But a healthy boundary doesn't create isolation, it creates margin. Um, when I look at boundaries that I've put in my life that are healthy, um, they give me room to thrive, right? They don't cut me off from people. They open doors for me to thrive in healthy ways. They create margin in my life. They give me energy in my life. That's why, if like I've had people in my life where they've admitted and said, Isaac, uh, every time someone texts me and asks if I want to hang out with them, I'm always like, yes, absolutely. And I don't have a calendar and I don't organize my schedule and I don't have certain boundaries for who I hang out with and who I can't. And because of that, it just drains me and it's creating anxiety in my life and it's depleting me, right? So, in that situation, because there's a lack of boundaries, it's actually depleting the person and there is no margin for health, right? It's creating more problems than it is solutions for that person. So in some cases, when you put a healthy boundary in place, it creates that margin for you in your life to focus on the areas that are most important, right? It doesn't isolate you from people like a toxic barrier does, but it creates margin for you to thrive and to focus and prioritize things in your life. That's the third filter that I use to try to identify as best as I can, what a healthy boundary is. And then the last filter that I use when trying to identify healthy boundaries in my life is uh, that they allow us to respond out of love. Um, you're going to have to tell people no at some point. You're going to have to disagree with people. Um, there are people in my life over the years that I've disagreed with. Um, whether it came to how I ran my business or how we do things in a church or uh, working at a company, working with teammates, working with a boss. And you guys go through this too, but what I'm having to learn about myself, and this is an area that I'm growing in, is that a healthy boundary allows you to disagree with someone and allows you to have a difference of opinion, but it allows you to do that with a heart of love. And you can tell when something isn't a healthy boundary. You can tell when it's a toxic barrier when you disagree with someone out of anger and you're willing to sacrifice a relationship that you've poured years into. And that's coming from issues that I've had to deal with, because when people have gotten angry at me for something I did in my business, or I've had a coworker uh, you know rip into me because they thought that I did something wrong when I was working on a project, my tendency is to react in a negative way and to just be like, you know what, screw you, or you're way out of line, and all of a sudden the barriers go up, and I start to cut that person off in my life. So, healthy boundaries are the opposite of that. Healthy boundaries respond out of love. Healthy boundaries allow you to disagree with people and say, I don't agree with that. I this is why I think we need to do things this way. Here's the information I'm working off of. I don't think we should do that, but you know what? I respect your opinion, and whatever the outcome of this is, I value our relationship, and I'm not going to let the outcome get in the way of the mission that we're working towards. Um, so again, those are a few filters that I've been using for me personally to try to um, identify healthy boundaries and toxic barriers, because they do look alike. They come off as very similar on the surface, but it's when you start digging and trying to get to the root, right? That's when you start realizing, wait a minute, this isn't a healthy boundary. This is a toxic barrier. So I hope that helps you. I hope it encourages you. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the 4 filters that I use to identify toxic barriers. So can't wait to have you join me in that next episode. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you soon.